I want to show you guys how I layer supersaws inside of Ableton with the help of Serum. Okay, so I have my all group here, and then inside of here I have a lead. Went ahead and renamed that really quickly. And then I have my saws, and then I have just a simple sub. For simple sub, it's really nothing much. It's just literally a sub. I did some distortion, and I compressed the signal a bit, and then did some EQ with a cut at around, I think, 250? Oh, I'm sorry, 200. So yeah, it's just a simple sub. And then for the lead, it's also just a basic shape square wave, and there's like automation going on with the fine tuning to get this like wobbly sound as it plays. And then I did some post-processing on pretty much everything. So for like the lead, the saws, and the sub, I did this reverb effect, and then I added some OTT, and then of course I added a limiter at the end of this chain. And then for the saw group, I just put an EQ8 on this with a high-pass filter cutting at 250 Hz to make room for the sub. At first, I was going to do just a simple sub, and then I started like adding distortion and then compressing it, and then of course with distortion, that adds harmonics to your sound, so I just went ahead and put an EQ on that just to make sure that there wasn't going to be any frequencies interfering with our saws. But yeah, now that I showed you guys these groups, I want to go ahead and talk about the important part in here, which is the super saws. And for this, I'm going to be using Serum for pretty much all the sounds for the super saws. So yeah, let's dive right into it. Okay, so for the super saws, I have them layered here inside of 3 tracks. So I have the main saws, and then I have the saw layer, and then I have a square layer. So I'm going to go over this first track first. And also for each track, there's really no like post-processing or anything, it's just the Serums. But anyways, back to this first track, I want to show you guys what I did inside of here. So I have the noise oscillator on, oscillator A and oscillator B on, and then I did a high pass filter for all 3 of those sound sources. And then another thing I kind of want to show you guys here is that I modulated the volume of each of these oscillators. So for the noise, I'm modulating the volume with LFO1 with a triangled wave shape, and then I have the volumes at different levels here, with the noise level being the lowest, which is set around like 39, and then oscillator A's level is set at 100, and oscillator B's level is set at 50. And so for this noise group, I just mainly wanted to add like a bit more texture to the saws, and so that way when I added the OTT, it was just going to bring the sound out a little bit more. And so without the saw, it sounds like this. And then with the saw, it sounds like this. And so it just adds more to the highs. And then for oscillator A, I just went ahead and turned the unison voices to 8, and the detune I set it to 0.14. And for the second oscillator, kind of the same story. I have 8 unison voices, except for the detune, I went ahead and turned it down a bit. And for the high pass filter, I used a slope of 18. I set the cutoff to 200 Hz, and then the resonance is at 15%. And now I want to kind of show you what's inside of this effects group. I don't know why this reverb is on. I'm going to turn that off. That's not doing anything. But pretty much the main thing, what I added here was a compressor, doing OTT compression to really bring out the signal. And I have the release time turned down by quite a bit, and I turned the gain up to around almost 7 decibels. And for the EQ, I just did another simple high pass cut around 200 Hz. And then for the second band, I did a peak filter, boosted the gain a little bit by around like 2 decibels at around 5000 Hz. So yeah, that is pretty much it for this first Serum inside of this MIDI track. Oh, and I also forgot to mention that oscillator B is brought down by an octave, so it's at -1 here. Our second saw layer group is literally just a sawtooth wave that's detuned. I added some distortion, EQ, and a OTT. So I want to start off by saying that I didn't add the chords from the first track here. I actually duplicated this first MIDI track and put it inside of our second layer group here. And what I did was silent the chords and chose one note to layer on top of our super saws. I usually like to do this when layering. And so this is what it pretty much sounds like. And then this is what it sounds like together. And for the FX in here, I just added a distortion, EQ, and a compressor. For the distortion, I went ahead and turned up the drive by quite a bit. For the EQ8, I have a high pass filter set to 300 Hz. And then for the compressor, I set it to the multiband OTT setting. I turned the gain up to around 9 decibels, and I turned down the release by quite a bit. Then I also went ahead and modulated the level of our oscillator with our first LFO here. And then for the unison, I set the voices to 5, and I detuned it to about 0.25, so it's like halfway. And so yeah, this layer is just meant to be like another gritty layer on top of our super saws. This third layer is actually a square wave from Basic Shapes, and I pretty much turned the unison up to 5, detuned it a little bit, so it's at 0.09, and then I modulated the LFO with LFO 1. And then for the effects, I didn't really do too much. I just EQ'd it, did a high pass and a low pass, and I set it to around like 2000 hertz, so I tried to make like a band pass filter. And then I came over here to the master and turned it down by quite a bit because I didn't really want this group to be too loud. The main thing that I wanted to stand out was the main super saws, which is our first group, and the lead. And so it sounds like this. Without the square layer, it sounds like this. And then all together, it sounds like this. So yeah, not too much of a huge difference, but yeah, it's just another layer to the sound to add more depth. And that is how I layer my super saws. 3 tracks will usually do. I try to keep things as simple as possible so that way my mix doesn't get too muddy, and it's just easier to keep track of things as well. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you in the next one. Adios.